It's here. The trains are rolling and so are the trucks. We have a lot for you. Matt Derrick is here from ChiefsDigest.com to give us the inside of just what are we looking at as the Chiefs prepare to kick off their training camp today on Locked On Chiefs.
From the land of the free and the home of the Chiefs, this is the Locked On Chiefs podcast.
Welcome back, everybody. That part of the year has actually come now. We're going to get started. This is Locked On Chiefs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day for free. And you get to hear Matt Derrick from ChiefsDigest.com for free today. Matt, it's here. It's time, right? We're on the road, correct?
We're on the road. Was out at the facility earlier today for packing up the trailers and heading off to St. Joe. So they'd already loaded up one truck. They were loading up a second. They had the flatbed with all the blocking sleds on it ready to roll. So by the late this afternoon, I imagine everything they should be starting to unpack in St. Joseph as we speak.
Wow, that's pretty great, folks. Thanks for making us your first listen. Check another Locked On show for your next. I'm Ryan Tracy, the founder of Rogue Analytics and Performance Consulting, as well as NFL33.com and RGRFootball.com. You can check those out. And what Matt is describing is the hardest part of the anticipation for me, because when you see the sleds on a truck, that immediately takes me to my favorite spot to start every practice. And that is the defensive line on the sled in the corner of the practice facility. Don't go there the week I'm there, folks, because I need to get footage. But you guys should go check it out in the meantime. It's amazing how, for the fan base, when they get there, it's so much more real that we forget during the course of the season. So I think this prep area, getting the sleds, you see baskets of helmets and all kinds of things. It's a gargantuan task to prepare the non-players, everything else to get ready for training camp. And I think the equipment group itself just has the most gargantuan task because it's out there in the public. But moving from one facility to another in a single day, is that pretty standard for them?
It is. I mean, and there's always going to be things that you may be caught down, missing. I mean, there's always going to maybe something that sneaks through, or there's something that pops up every year, something maybe you run out of, but they take everything. I mean, and Alan Wright, when we got to talk to him earlier today, he didn't go into the numbers like sometimes he does, but sometimes he'll rattle off, okay, we're taking 38,000 packages of chewing gum, and we're taking 19,000 bottles of Gatorade, and they'll go on and on with some of these. And some things they have drop ship, so that makes it easier, so they don't have to haul it from Kansas City. But they haul everything. I mean, they're taking their computer monitors. I mean, remember for about probably I'm trying to remember. I mean, I think last year, was kind of a first normal camp in a couple of years. I think they had like 180 people up at camp. Remember, only half those are players. I mean, the rest are coaches, and it's not just even coaches. It's the support staff, public relations. I mean, you name it. I mean, there's a lot of people that go into this. And, in talking to Alan, this is the first chance we've really got to talk to Alan in a couple of years because of the pandemic restrictions and everything. And I even brought that up and talked to him about, how maybe things had changed, after a result of the COVID restrictions. And he'd mentioned that, that they've dramatically changed their sanitary policies with a lot of things permanently. I mean, they're just going to be doing things differently. So there'll probably be some things that you see as far as, sanitizing things on the sidelines that you saw during the pandemic that are just going to stick around. And it's the same thing in the dorms. I mean, they're trying to keep these guys healthy as much as possible. And they learned some new things during the pandemic about how to do that. So I thought it was pretty interesting, as far as all that goes. And one thing that, Alan mentioned too, that I had not heard, before and everything, but was that, and this makes sense, but because of the COVID restrictions that the league had, there were limits on how many equipment people and managers and assistants that he could have. So, Alan said he was doing things he hadn't had to do in a long time. As being the boss, usually he's got some people. He's like, I had to be at the stadium, one week, when we get 4:00 in the morning, because he's like, I'm getting things ready that I hadn't had to get ready myself for a while. And that's just, just the fact that now that everything is pretty much back to normal and they're able to be full staffed again, you see a lot more fun. I mean, this was, I would say, even though we had the off, OTAs and everything, and things were pretty much back to normal then. I mean, this was, I think, the most, lighthearted, fun moment that I'd seen in a while behind the scenes with the Chiefs, because I think that, at this point, everything is normal and all systems go, and pandemic, knock on wood's behind them.
I think that's really the turning point is you've learned all these extra things, and some you'll carry over, but getting back to normal, I think, is what speeds the process. And there's a lot of players that need that as well. The front office guys, I didn't think about moving monitors and really setting up new offices that you still have to do your old role in. For the front office, that's got to be a challenge as well, because they're constantly going over film. They're constantly seeing who might be released that they might want to have interest in. There's a lot of churn that's going to happen here in the next 6 weeks. But as we get ready for them to report, is there anything that stands out to you that is a different preparation this year than maybe years past?
I mean, to a degree, it looks like a lot of things are getting back to normal. There's one thing I learned today that I also did not know, but and I probably think this is funnier maybe than a lot of other people do, but I think it's hilarious. They've got the big bins that they pack everything into that are then loaded onto these 24-foot trailers or whatever, and they name each of the bins. And so, one is named after everybody's hometown. So, they have like a Sugar Creek, for Alan Wright. They name a bunch after Native American, places and locations and everything, kind of homage to Chiefs history. And then they have other nods to Chiefs history. And I was told that one of them was Newark. And I just kind of tilted my head. And they were like, yeah, we named it after all the equipment that ended up in Newark, the Newark airport, before this Patriots game. I mean, that's the kind of fun they're having. So, yeah, I mean, that's kind of at least the way that things are at least back to normal, and you're kind of seeing things. And hey, Alan and his group, they know how to poke some fun at themselves. They have some fun.
That's pretty good. I have a couple of ideas. You gave me a t-shirt idea. Hey, return to sender, please. Welcome to Kansas City. We're going to get into what were expectations. What are we looking to see here on the offensive side of the ball here when we get back in a second? Because I have to tell you about BetOnline, where you can make all the prop bets that you want with all the information that you need to get your money on the line in a way that gives you a good chance to get that back and then some. The football season is in full swing. You want to bet on how many practice interceptions somebody rolls out, you can bet on that. You want to know who's going to start the starting lineup week one. A lot of prop bets there, as well as all the actual game action. Go check it out. And yes, the other sports are still going on, but as of now, I'm officially calling it that everything else is on the sideline and football's back. So welcome, folks. Get over there to BetOnline. It's super easy to navigate, and it helps you get yourself organized for your betting season, which starts now. Get over to BetOnline, where the game starts. So, Matt, what I want to go through is not what we think is going to happen, not the odds on or who's the dark horse. What do you want to see? We're going to go position by position, because we'll save the quarterback for last, because I think we all know what we're looking for there. But in order for the Chiefs to be the most successful on the offensive side of the ball, it comes down now, obviously, with all the drama about Orlando Brown and what's going on with Lucas Niang. What do you want to see happen at the tackle position on the offensive line?
Yeah, I mean, well, one, I think the first thing you need to see Orlando Brown in training camp as soon as possible. The only reason we're talking about it, frankly, is that Orlando has opened the door. When he talked about, the fact that the Chiefs need their starting left tackle, during the season. I mean, and Jamal, his advisor, had kind of opened the door too, that maybe he's not going to be there at the beginning of training camp. Historically, that does not end well for players who are holding out of camp. I mean, it's anecdotal to a degree for sure, and there's going to be plenty of examples of guys that missed some time in camp and it didn't derail their seasons or anything, but it just doesn't usually seem to pan out real well when guys miss chunks of time, and maybe even more so the way that practices are done now, because you just don't get to hit as much and have as much activity as you used to. So you really start missing things almost immediately in these camps. So that's first and foremost. I mean, yeah, it's going to be an idle curiosity for me to see who lines up at left tackle if Orlando Brown doesn't show up. Because if I see Joe Thuney at left tackle, I'm thinking that the Chiefs seriously think this might be a long-term deal. Whereas if it's Roderick Johnson or Jaron Christian lining up at left tackle, then it's a caretaker situation. The other thing, we know the interior of the line. It's going to be fine. The other really question on the line is going to be at right tackle. And I'm expecting that Andrew Wiley is going to enter camp as the number one guy. I don't think that the Chiefs will be in bad shakes if he's the starter in week one. He's proved that he can do it. He's more than capable of playing the position. But if somebody beats him out, that's a good sign. I mean, if Lucas Niang is healthy, which I have no indication at this point that he's going to be ready for week 1, I think Darian Kennard is probably the bigger X factor there. But if a Kennard beats him out, then that's a positive. I mean, there's no doubt to me that's an upside, because I think you have what you got in Andrew Wiley. So if you're able to exceed that and you feel like you can improve, that's a good sign for me.
I completely agree with you, because, like you said, it's a known quantity in a functional quality. It's not like you're beating out a complete backup. It's a guy who's played those snaps for you, and other than a Super Bowl, has done pretty well, especially in the coaching staff's view of it. So, but that's an interesting situation that I too don't think there's any way Niang can be close to being back by week 1. I really expect a mid-season debut for him, if anything, at practice, and maybe a couple of weeks before we can get into game action beyond that. So that said, if Orlando does choose not to come to camp, and you have to prepare all the way up maybe till week 1, which is a colossal mistake. We'll talk about that another day. But what do you do? Is it Sharon Christian and Wiley? Is it, if Kennard's out playing or would win that right tackle job from Wiley, do you flip Wiley to left? Like, how do you balance? Is it truly the best 5 play, and particularly the best 2 tackles?
Yeah, that's what I think is a bit of an interesting question, because I think there's an argument to be made, honestly, that, taking Brown out of the equation and taking Niang out of the equation, Andrew Wiley probably is the best tackle on this team at either position right now. But that's one thing that Andy Heck and Andy Reid have always liked to do, is that they like to be able to lock a guy into a position and not move him around. And that's why I think that, with Wiley, hey, they view him as probably their next man up at a few different spots. I mean, and their probably preference would be for Andrew Wiley to be their 6th offensive lineman, because he can come in and play 4 different positions for you. And that's the kind of flexibility they love in that spot. But hey, if he's gonna start, I think they want to keep him at one place and keep him at right tackle, where he's had the most experience. Jaron Christian has more NFL experience on the left side. Roderick Johnson's the kind of a wild card here, and I haven't even brought in like a guy like Prince Tega Wanongo, who could certainly be in the conversation too. I mean, you go down the depth chart, and I mean, there's going to be some guys competing, but at least from what we kind of learned during the offseason program, the Chiefs were at least giving Christian and Johnson most of that work with the one. So I'm fully expecting it to be one of those 2 guys that opens up camp, barring some miracle or some drastic change from what we think right now. But hey, both those guys, are caretakers. They're placeholders. And can they fulfill that? Yeah. I mean, I think that they're the kind of guys who can keep the show running for a couple of weeks. But no, if you're a Super Bowl team, you want Orlando Brown there when it counts, and you need him there for most of the season.
Like you said earlier, we know what the interior 3 is going to be, barring any kind of foreseen permanent addition to the Orlando situation. That said, how do you feel about moving Thuney out? If it is, you don't think you're going to get this done not only by week 1, but beyond that, and there's a holdout situation brewing, is it worth jumbling the offensive line to that point early? Because I don't expect it, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, and I think that's why, to me, it's a bit of a remote chance, because I think that, like I said, to me, I'm always seeing Joe Thuney early in camp at left tackle if the Chiefs are truly sending a signal that they think that Orlando is going to be a long-term problem. I mean, that's why, to me, it's going to send off immediate alarm bells if you see Joe Thuney on the left side, because they want him to be their left guard. I mean, that's what they signed him to be. That's what they expect him to be. Their line is the best when he's going to be at left guard, because you're going to have Orlando at left tackle. But then it gets into the question, I mean, who is truly your best left tackle on this team? Well, if Orlando's not there, it probably is Joe Thuney. I mean, the only thing that he lacks is the arm length. And I think we saw in the one game he played there last year at that spot, that arm length is not a debilitating factor. I mean, he's good enough to compensate. Now you're going to have to do some things differently, because certainly the Chiefs coach that position to be able to do some things with their arm and their length that Thuney would not be able to do.
Right.
But, from a technique standpoint, from an execution standpoint, yeah, Thuney's your best guy there outside of Orlando. And
if that happens, it's an instant plug-in for Allegretti, correct?
I think he would be the next guy up. I mean, they certainly have some options, once again, some of the other veteran guys and some guys could move around. But yeah, I think that Allegretti makes the most sense at this point. He would be the backup, I think, at any of those interior positions. Austin Ryder obviously would be a guy at center. But hey, if Allegretti is going to get opportunities to play center too. I mean, they see him as a guy who can play all three of those spots.
Okay. So that's the offensive line, folks. The skill positions are a little bit different. We're going to get to some questions. What do we want to see happen on the offensive skill positions coming up next? Matt, I want to start out of order because I think this question really shapes what you can do at wide receiver and running back. What do you want to see them do? How many tight ends do you want on this 53?
I think it's got to be 4. And if it's going to be 3, I don't want to be making that choice over who's gonna be the odd man out. I mean, I think it's got to be 4, and if it's not 4, you probably unfortunately have an injury because the Chiefs like the 4 that they have. Really at this point, I could certainly make a case that Blake Bell at this point, I mean, is a fairly one-dimensional guy. I mean, you're going to be using him, and certainly you look at the way that the Chiefs used him last year. I mean, it was a pretty one-dimensional kind of situation. I mean, he was not the guy that was just out there in all positions. They gave guys other chances, and certainly early in the season, I mean, Jody Fortson was the receiving guy, and it's certainly he showed all indications during the offseason that injury is behind him. And if he's able to, get back to as close to 100%, and that's a hard thing to do with that Achilles injury. Yeah. I mean, I feel for the guy. I really hope he can. I mean, that's a tough ask. But if he can, I mean, that's a guy that you do feel like can be a solid number 2 receiving guy. Noah Gray's the wild card because, you just didn't see him kind of step up during the season last year and prove it. But it's a guy that the Chiefs want to see more out of. So I think 4 will make it. I'll be very surprised if it's only 3, and that's important, like you said, because you talked about tight end first. That's going to affect some other position groups when you make those numbers decisions.
Yeah. 4 tight ends pretty much keeps it to 6 wide receivers. Am I wrong?
I think it's going to have to be 6 wide receivers almost, period, because I think you just got too much talent. I don't think there's one of these guys that you want to take a chance and a risk that you're going to lose. Certainly, you could, with the expanded practice squads, you can keep extra receivers around, but you're going to have to expose somebody to waivers. And you can get some guys, through. I mean, you saw the Chiefs did that with Cornell Powell last year. Maybe you can get some guys through. But I was 6. I mean, especially if depending on who the 6 are, you need special teams guys, you need return guys, and no matter how you slice it right now, I look at that lineup and I think 6 makes the most sense.
Okay, so 7's a stretch. A lot of people are looking for 7. I can't see that happening.
I can't see it happening either.
Okay, so that said, if it's your druthers, what's best for this team? Who makes it? Who are those 6? Obviously, we know the top 4.
Yeah, the top 4, and really, I mean, it is an all-out competition, and it's not just a couple of guys, competing for a 5 and a 6 spot. I think it goes at least 9 deep as far as that competition goes, because it could be, Justin Watson's been in that group, Darius Fountain's back. Now I'm blanking on everybody's names.
Gordon's in there.
Josh Gordon's in there.
Justin Ross. I mean,
you got Justin Ross, exactly. And honestly, I mean, there were some other guys like Omar Bayless and and some other guys that really had some moments. And it's going to depend on hey, of the 4 that we've talked about, who's your kick returner of that group? I mean, who's your punt returner? There's not really a punt returner in that mix. I mean, McCole Hardman. I think Dave Tobe's seen everything he needs to see from McCole on the punt return. I mean, kick returns even made them a little nervous. So who's it going to be? I mean, we'll see if Sky Moore gets a chance. Isaiah Pacheco, running back, if he makes the team, is going to have a chance. I mean, there are some possibilities, but that 5th or 6th spot, and if it's a guy like a Justin Ross or a Josh Gordon who wins that 5th spot, is that a guy who can play special teams for you in 23? That makes it probably a whole lot easier for a guy like Reese Fountain or Justin Watson to claim those spots because those guys are both, solid special teams players.
Right.
So, I mean, I could not even hazard a guess at this point about who's going to win those last 2 spots. And I don't even think it's fair to say, who's got a leg up because I think that at this point, it's a wide open competition.
Would you agree that the back end of the running back group is too? You mentioned Pacheco. I think he and Gore are probably fighting it out behind Rojo and CH. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's another position group where it's, going to be tough. I mean, if you're keeping 6 receivers and 4 tight ends, you're keeping a fullback. Now, all of a sudden, you want to try and keep 5 running backs with one of those being a fullback. that's tight numbers wise.
Right.
So yeah, Pacheco, Derek Gore, I mean, they're going to be in competition for that last spot. And Pacheco is really, to me, intriguing because that's a guy that if he does win that spot and he can win a return spot, now suddenly you got a multi-purpose guy. I mean, he could play a lot of special teams too. That's a guy who could be really valuable to you taking up a roster spot.
That brings me to my last guy, because all of this is plenty of numbers on the offensive side. How does Jerry Neely make this roster?
That is a great question because I don't know for sure. I mean, I thought he had a really, really good shot until the Chiefs brought back, McKinnon. I mean, because to me during OTAs, I looked out there and I was like, Jerry Neely is a 7 years younger version of Jerick McKinnon. I mean, they're kind of similar size-wise. Their escapability is the kind of same. I mean, they're both fast, but not the fastest guys in the world. But, it's really just their, ability in the passing game. I mean, there's so many things about those guys that just remind me of each other. And Ely, I think, is better because, once again, that's a position that when you're evaluating your team, you tend to overvalue those guys. I mean, Jerry Neely to me would probably easily clear waivers. So that's a strong candidate for a practice squad. And I expect, unless he just shows nothing to us during camp, I think that's going to be a guy who's going to be around all year.
Yeah, that makes sense to me too. That's the offensive side of the ball, folks. We're going to be back and finish this up on the defensive side for tomorrow, so do not miss it. In the meantime, check out all the updates at ChiefsDigest.com and follow Matt at Matt Derrick on Twitter. As you can check out me as well, NFL 33 and RGR football, as well as this show. Thanks for being here today. Matt will be right back tomorrow.